Hey folks, welcome back to my guest room for Chapter 6 of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Last time we read Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is primarily, I think, a foreshadowing chapter, but also it gives us a great juxtaposition or contrast between the life that people like Dorian and Lord Henry are living and the life that poorer people like the Vane family are living. Chapter 5 followed the Vane family. We met Sybil Vane, the woman who is, the 17-year-old girl that Dorian is asked to marry him, that apparently he's going to marry. And we met her mom, old faded actress who has fake jeweled hands and is always talking about, gold digging and money. And we met the brother James, who's going off to Australia on a ship as a sailor. James took a walk with Sybil, and he's got a race consciousness where he hates gentlemen, and it's ironic because we find out that his dad's a gentleman, his mom was never married to her, so he's what we call a bastard child. And he makes this declaration that if Dorian, who he only knows as Prince Charming, because that's Sybil's only name for him, if he hurts Sybil, he's going to, quote, hunt him down like a dog and kill him. And so clearly we're setting up something that's going to happen, later in the book in some way or be significant. So that was, one of the central focuses. Then we got the image of, him dining with the flies buzzing around and the low quality of life that they have in their sort of slum apartment, and contrasting that with Lord Henry. In fact, I think that Dorian and Lord Henry's dinner is the subject matter of Chapter 6. And so while you picture James eating there, with his mom nagging him, eating whatever unfortunate meal he's eating with the flies buzzing around, waiting to ask her if his dad was a gentleman, and if she was married to him, while that's going on, this chapter 6, is simultaneously going on, because you'll remember Sybil is sleeping, and she is going to wake up and then go to the theater and be Juliet tonight. And Dorian has asked Basil and Lord Henry to come watch the show with him tonight. And so they're coming to see Sybil for the first time. And so this is the dinner that the three of them are having right before they go to the show, simultaneous with James's dinner. All right, enough talk. Let's read and do a little bit of analysis and see if you get the same things out of the chapter that I get. "I suppose you have heard the news, Basil," said Lord Henry that evening as Hallward was shown into a little private room at the Bristol where dinner had been laid for three. Now we're on Chapter 6. We haven't seen Basil since Chapter 2. He's been mentioned, but he hasn't made a physical appearance. Where dinner had been laid for three. "No, Harry," answered the artist, giving his hat and coat to the bowing waiter. "What is it? Nothing about politics, I hope." "They don't interest me. There's hardly a single person in the House of Commons worth painting, though many of them would be the better for a little whitewashing." A little funny joke of Oscar Wilde's at the expense of Parliament. Always a good idea. "Dorian Gray is engaged to be married," said Lord Henry, watching him as he spoke. Good information here. Lord Henry's watching Basil carefully. You know that Basil's sort of in love with Dorian. That comes out pretty clearly in Chapters 1 and 2. And he's sort of admitted this to Lord Henry, who has understood what he's put down. And Lord Henry's enjoying giving bad news to Basil and watching his reaction because, Lord Henry's a psychologist and he likes watching people and their reactions and thinking about them, which has also been made clear. Anyway, "Dorian Gray is engaged to be married," said Lord Henry, watching him as he spoke. Hallward started, then frowned. "Dorian engaged to be married?" he cried. "Impossible." "It is perfectly true." "To whom?" "And to some little actress or other." "I can't believe it. Dorian's far too sensible. Dorian is far too wise not to do foolish things now and then, my dear Basil." That's one of those handy paradoxes that he always uses. "Marriage is hardly a thing one can do now and then, Harry." And now here's Basil being moral again. We talked about Basil representing medievalism, and morality and those sorts of things. He clearly is. He's like, you can't just get married whenever you want to. "Except in America," rejoined Lord Henry languidly. "But I didn't say that he was married. I said he was engaged to be married. There's a great difference. I have a distinct remembrance of being married, but I have no recollection at all of being engaged. I am inclined to think that I never was engaged." But think of Dorian's birth and position and wealth. It would be absurd for him to marry so much beneath him. There's your class struggle coming in. Even Basil, who seems to be the moral character, is like, wait, what? He's rich. How can he marry this poor woman? Let's see. If you want him to marry this girl, tell him that, Basil. He is sure to do it. Whenever a man does a thoroughly stupid thing, it is always for the noblest motives. I hope this girl is good, Harry. I don't want to see Dorian tied to some vile creature who might degrade his nature and ruin his intellect. Pause. Lord Henry's kind of doing that to him already. I think that's interesting. Oh, she's better than good. She is beautiful, murmured Lord Henry, sipping a glass of vermouth and orange bitters. Dorian says she is beautiful, and he's not often wrong about things of that kind. Your portrait of him has quickened his appreciation of the personal appearance of other people. It has had that excellent effect among others. We are to see her tonight, if that boy doesn't forget his appointment. Are you serious? Quite serious, Basil. I should be miserable if I thought I should ever be more serious than I am at the present moment. But do you approve of it, Harry? Asked the painter, walking up and down the room and biting his lip. You can't approve of it, possibly. It is some silly infatuation. I never approve or disapprove of anything now. It is an absurd attitude to take toward life. We are not sent into the world to air our moral prejudices. Another obvious contrast between Basil and Lord Henry. Basil casts judgment on people. Maybe that's another connection between him and God. Lord Henry just sits back and is like, I have no judgment on anything. And these are two Victorian attitudes. Victorians were very judgy, but there was also a subset who were very like, let's be permissive. And Lord Henry seems to be that other. I never take any notice of what common people say, and I never interfere with what charming people do. If a personality fascinates me, whatever mode of expression that personality selects is absolutely delightful to me. Dorian Gray falls in love with a beautiful girl who acts Juliet and proposes to marry her. Why not? If he wedded Messalina, he would be none the less interesting. Pause. That's an allusion. Messalina, look her up. She was a Roman empress. Famous for her promiscuity. I think the story is that, content warning, I guess. I think the story is that she had a contest with a prostitute to see who could, you know what I'm saying. And she won. Ultimately she was killed for this, but yeah, that's the guy that Lord Henry's, or the woman that Lord Henry's referring to. And if that's the case, what does it say about him, the allusions that he's making? More connection to Rome in opposition directly to medievalism right here. I think it's totally going on. I am not a champion of marriage. The real drawback of marriage is that it makes one unselfish, and unselfish people are colorless. They lack individuality. Still, there are certain temperaments that marriage makes more complex. They retain their egotism and add to it many other egos. They are forced to have more than one life. They become more highly organized, and to be highly organized is, I should fancy, the object of man's existence. Besides, every experience is of value, and whatever one may say against marriage, it is certainly an experience. I hope that Dorian will make this girl his wife, passionately adore her for 6 months, and then suddenly become fascinated by someone else. It would make a wonderful study. You don't mean a single word of that, Harry. You know you don't. If Dorian Gray's life were spoiled, no one would be sorrier than yourself. You are much better than you pretend to be. Again, there's a romanticism of Basil, believing the good in somebody who is a Satan figure, and thinking that he's moral behind all of his act, which is just sort of a charade on the surface. Lord Henry laughed. The reason we all like to think so well of others is that we are all afraid of ourselves. The basis of optimism is sheer terror. Pause and think about this again. The basis of optimism is terror? That seems like a contradiction or a paradox, but he's going to explain it. We think that we are generous because we credit our neighbor with the possession of those virtues that are likely to benefit us. We praise the banker that we may overdraw our account, and find good qualities in the highwayman and hope that he may spare our pockets. I mean everything that I have said. I have the greatest contempt for optimism. As for a spoiled life, no life is spoiled but one whose growth is arrested. If you want to mar nature, you have merely to reform it. As for marriage, of course that would be silly, but there are other more interesting bonds between men and women, and I shall certainly encourage them. They have the charm of being fashionable. But here is Dorian himself. He will tell you more than I can. My dear Harry, my dear Basil, you must both congratulate me, said the lad, throwing off his evening cape with its satin-lined wings and shaking each of his friends by the hand in turn. I have never been so happy. Of course it is sudden. All really delightful things are. And yet it seems to me to be the one thing I have been looking for all my life. He was flustered with excitement and pleasure, and looked extraordinarily handsome. "I hope you will always be very happy, Dorian," said Hallward, "but I don't quite forgive you for not having let me know of your engagement. You let Harry know." So a little bit of a contrast between Basil and Harry here. But also, this is characterization for Basil. He wants Dorian to be happy. Obviously this is disheartening news for him, and he doesn't approve of it, but Dorian's happiness is paramount in Basil's life. "And I don't forgive you for being late for dinner," broke in Lord Henry, putting his hand on the lad's shoulder, and smiling as he spoke. "Come, let us sit down and try what the new chef here is like, and then you will tell us how it all came about." "There is really not much to tell," cried Dorian as they took their seats around the small table. "What happened was simply this. After I left you yesterday evening, Harry, I dressed and had some dinner at that little Italian restaurant in Rupert Street you introduced me to, and went down to 8 o'clock to the theater. Sybil was playing Rosalind. These are all illusions, of course. Of course, the scenery was dreadful, and Orlando absurd, but Sybil, you should have seen her. When she came on in her boy's clothes, she was perfectly wonderful. She wore a moss-colored velvet jerkin with cinnamon sleeves, slim brown cross-gartered hose, a dainty little green cap with a hawk's feather caught in a jewel, and a hooded cloak lined with dull red. She had never seemed to me more exquisite." Pause. Talking about sexuality in this book, I think it's interesting that Dorian falls hard enough for Sybil to propose to her on the day she's dressed as a boy. Obviously, Oscar Wilde is gay, and there's plenty of scholarship about this book that suggests that whether or not you believe Basil is gay or not, Dorian is, maybe bisexual. It's hard to know. But there's complicated things going on, and we'll have to keep reading and looking as we go through. She had all the delicate grace of that Tanagra figure that you have in your studio, Basil. Her hair clustered around her face like dark leaves around a pale rose, and our floral imagery continues. You can track floral imagery throughout this whole scene. As for her acting, well, you shall see her tonight. She is simply a born artist. I sat in the dingy box absolutely enthralled. I forgot that I was in London, and in the 19th century. I was away with my love in a forest that no man had ever seen. After the performance was over, I went behind and spoke to her. As we were sitting together, suddenly there came into her eyes a look I had never seen there before. My lips moved towards hers. We kissed each other. I can't describe to you what I felt at that moment. It seems to me that all my life had been narrowed to one perfect point of rose-colored joy. She trembled all over and shook like a white narcissus. That's both a flower and an illusion. One we already used on Dorian, so they're both sort of narcissists. We have that word narcissistic. Then she flung herself down on her knees and kissed my hands. I feel I should not tell you this, but I can't help it. Of course our engagement is dead secret. She has not even told her own mother. I don't know what my guardians will say. Lord Radley is sure to be furious. I don't care. I shall be of age in less than a year, and then I can do what I like. I have been right, Basil, haven't I? To take my love out of poetry and to find my wife in Shakespeare's plays. Lips that Shakespeare taught to speak have whispered their secret in my ear. I have had the arms of Rosalind around me and kissed Juliet on the mouth. Again, central question. Is he in love with her, or is he in love with Shakespeare and Shakespeare's plays and the way that she portrays the art? Yes, Dorian, I suppose you were right, said Hallward slowly. Have you seen her today? Asked Lord Henry. Dorian Gray shook his head. I left her in the forest of Arden. I shall find her in an orchard in Verona. Lord Henry sipped his champagne in a meditative manner. And what particular point did you mention the word marriage, Dorian? And what did she say in answer? Perhaps you forgot all about it. My dear Harry, I did not treat it as a business transaction. I did not make any formal proposal. I told her that I loved her, and she said she was not worthy to be my wife. Not worthy? Why, the whole world is nothing to me compared with her. Women are so wonderfully practical, murmured Lord Henry. Much more practical than we are. In situations of that kind, we often forget to say anything about marriage, and they always remind us. Lord Henry's statement here makes the marriage seem mercenary, like Sybil is trying to marry Dorian for his wealth, and that she slipped... that she slipped this in here, to manipulate him into proposing marriage. Hallward held up his hand. Don't, Harry. You have annoyed Dorian. He is not like other men. He would never bring misery upon anyone. His nature is too fine for that. Lord Henry looked across the table. Dorian is never annoyed with me.